Hello, every folks, and good morning. Welcome to Tactics Ogre No Moving Part 2. So in this one, we are going to try to figure out how to touch Nybbeth. Now, weirdly enough, while that phrasing could definitely use some work, it is effectively exactly what we're working on here. See, one of the big questions about a run like this is whether or not you can even reach certain units, especially ones that, well, are kind of told not to approach you in situations that you cannot actually move upwards. See, we're basically functioning with the physics of a puddle, that in most situations we can only go downwards, and that's about it. We will have ways to potentially get around this at some point, but that some point is not right now. And specifically, when it comes to actually moving around, there may potentially be ways to get units into situations that they otherwise would not be able to. For example, there are going to be certain maps, like if you look at that tile kind of down there by that bush. Let's see if I can show it here. Kind of around here-ish. If it's showing the mouse, great. Or sorry, around here-ish is what I'm trying to say. Where, like, for example, in most circumstances, that would not be a valid movement, that we wouldn't be able to get up there. However, at a certain point, we will, let's say, be able to turn on Water Walk to be able to raise up on top of the water, and additionally, would be able to use something like Hover to go underneath something that doesn't currently have Water Walk, like, let's say, like an octopus or something. Put a unit on top, and then essentially use a combination of Hover and Water Walk to maybe get up to a tile that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get to. Again, in theory. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but something like that should be mechanically possible. You can't actually raise up a unit that has another unit on top of it at the moment. I don't believe. There may actually be... Now that I think about it, that's probably why there's that limitation of only using Hover on yourself, because that would require moving two entities at one time, which I doubt the game can do, but... if we have, for example, a unit sinking into the water using a water walk and then hover to then go one tile above the water and then use them as a bridge to go across, that could potentially be some bit of tech for the future. We'll get there when we get there, but for the time being, just know that that's potentially something in our arsenal for some of those crazier maps. That's why I mentioned that we'd be using a lot more movement abilities, but not in the way that you might be thinking. Like, for example, even if something flies, if it's shield bashed into a wall, it is still just shield bashed into a wall. And we'll be exploring more of that in a little bit of a moment here. But as we go through the Bolus fight, thankfully this is one of those fights where even though we were stuck at a really awkward angle for the vast majority of it, we still were able to pretty comfortably rely on the fact that he would end up approaching. So the AI of many boss units in this game effectively says that they want to hide behind the rest of their army. There's sort of a moving line of sorts. There's certain lines on the map where they will engage. There's certain lines on the map where they'll try to envelop you, and there's certain lines on the map where they will attempt to retreat if, for example, you are coming in from all sides. So they will do a lot of... They're more reactive than they oftentimes get credit for. But effectively, what we're looking for in this situation is actually nothing to do with Bolus whatsoever. I know from years of attempting the Stubborn Wretch challenge that he will eventually end up marching forward. Part of the kind of strategy for Stubborn Wretch is to become extraordinarily overpowered for this section and then have him approach and then attempt to fight him in that alleyway up top. And he will eventually get there once everybody else is dead. Now, in the case of this challenge here, though, we know that he'll eventually come to us, but we also know that we want to get a hold of those Beast Tamer marks. If we kill everything, fantastic. But if we don't get those Beast Tamer marks, that could be potentially an issue down the line. As of right now, one of the big downsides of our rule set here is the fact that while our options for healing have a ranged component, our options for damage just ended up unlocking the longbows, which, I mean, for now is just a single great bow in this party. It's right after this battle that longbows end up unlocking. We are still extremely limited in terms of actually landing a debuff on anything. Our casters don't have any long range yet, and as of so far, their odds are not great. They're not nothing, and later on we'll make extensive use of them, but for the time being, they're not good enough to really rely on comfortably. They can get up to their usual 30%, and obviously with everything that's going on here, that's not the end of the world by any means. But as it stands, we're better off using an archer for the time being in order to continuously have our movement options. Once we have longer range, we'll be extensively relying on basic casters in order to control fights with debuffs, but for the time being, for the time being, we've got what we've got. Anyway, so this particular fight I knew wouldn't be terribly complicated. He'll eventually come our way, we'll eventually kill off that beast tamer, and that will give us access to the lobber, which will allow us to then throw items onto our enemies there. So, for example, if we needed a single target dead with absolute certainty, we would use a lobber to throw a Dynast King's Meat on them, at which point the archers can basically melt them like nothing. This will become especially useful on fights down the road, where, for example, fights with the river ninjas and such like that, where their defense isn't enough to completely negate ranged attacks, but they still have reasonably high resistances. That would allow us to melt them pretty quickly. That being said, we also are kind of locked to a particular route. I was driving along yesterday and I noticed, we kind of gotta take law in this particular instance. Because I was thinking about chaos. I don't think we can reach Zapan under any circumstances in Rhyme. We can reach Vice, however, so it occurred to me that we basically are definitely taking law this time around. Anyway. I suppose the irony of that is the fact that we'd actually also similarly have a problem with the very first fight of Law, wherein we cannot reach the units up on top of the cliff by any normal means, but that's the thing, there's kind of just a question mark in every direction. There are still ways one way or another, and there are still technically a couple more parts to think this through before we completely commit to the bit there, so to speak. So that's kind of the thing here. This fight isn't going to be too complicated, so we're just going to talk about the future real quick. So, okay, so let me explain. On Chaos, the big soft lock that is definitely clear is that during Zapan's fight, you are stuck on a little island at the very bottom. You have steps that are going up, and at the time, while Water Walk should be available by that point, we don't have access to any means of hovering. Theoretically, I guess, kind of, sort of ferries, maybe, but that wouldn't really do what we needed to do. I don't feel like that would do the job whatsoever. So that does not feel like it is a functional plan. The thing is, Zapan would hold back, presumably until the rest of his team died. It's not that that team is incapable of being killed. And frankly, again, it might end up being a complete nothing burger of a thing. It might just end up being that he aggressively charges forward, but again, remember, we cannot move. Which means that Denim is stuck somehow taking on, like, 4 dragons, several casters, whatever else, without the means to move anywhere. So the main kind of approach in that particular situation would be to, I guess, just turn him into a knight, phalanx like crazy, and just pray to the RNG gods, which is gonna go about as well as you think it would. So I don't see that happening. I'm not saying that it's impossible, and it's something that I'm going to revisit, and again, it might still end up being the way to go forward here. Because again, the main issue that we run into immediately upon starting off on Law is that we also have to fight upwards through Balmamusa again. Now, when it comes to kind of Balmamusa one way or another, getting up that hill is already a problem. We should be able to get to the wall, though, and that should be enough to draw units our way, and there should be ways to make it happen. It might be soft lock right then and there, but again, we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. But as it stands, when it comes to actually fighting through upwards through Balmamusa a second time, there are units on top of a cliff. Those units cannot really come down under normal circumstances. I'm thinking if the range is just far enough, maybe AoEs could be used to splash away the props that prevent them from climbing the cliff. Maybe that would end up working. I don't know. Again, this is partially just like being routed on the fly. I have several plans in mind, but there's definitely things that I missed. So that could be a way to get that done. We'll again see how that goes. Dealing with the opposite fight on Chaos is, it's a decent bit more manageable. It's just going to be Aerosel at that point, and she will eventually end up approaching because she doesn't have a shot from where she is. But again, we're going uphill one way or the other. So, yeah. There's going to be complications. Hills are not our friend. However, we do have ways of getting up hills. That's going to be the kind of plus side of this particular episode. This episode will basically show you why some of those things are remotely possible. It's not going to be easy by any means, but there are ways to go and create our own lift up those dang stairs. So this guy finally ends up dying, you know, as you do. He does eventually approach, as you saw there, and we do end up getting our Beast Tamer marks. So, with that being said, we get our Berserkers, we get our Beast Tamers, we got a few more Knights if we want them for down the road, and especially when it comes to preparing for the Pacifist run, we're definitely going to want more of those Knight marks, which, by the way, I don't know whether this is going to come first or the other video will come first, but I did put out or I did at least make a video trying to explain why the other options were on the list for voting, like why I didn't just say, oh, let's go for the latest and greatest and call it a day as far as the Pacifist run is concerned, because to an extent, it can be done in all of them, and I plan to do it on all of them at some point, but it's obviously an egregiously long project. And truth be told, I kind of think the modded version would be the most interesting, but we'll see how that vote ends up going, if any votes end up changing or not. Not to mention, I guarantee, like, if I started on the modded run partway through, it's just going to be like, oh, recruit skills are no longer allowed, and they they can only be used on particular units. How it always tends to go. It's like, oh, here's the strategy you were relying on. It's like, yeah, no longer possible. Anyway, I still get a complete level 1 at some point. I haven't forgotten about that one. It's there. I just haven't gotten to it yet. Okay, so this is what the party is looking like at this point. Why was I holding on this screen? I don't know. That's a good question. I'm sure that's a good question to ask somebody who knows the answer to that question. Oh, right. I ended up switching Zatras away from that crossbow. It's not really helping us out very much here. Basically, he's just going to be swinging at stuff nearby. The reason that I had him using that crossbow was specifically to give him a ranged move, but I wanted to switch him out for a ranged rock throw. Also, I apologize if you hear like a crinkling sound in the background. I just realized that I had this little baggie of thumbstick caps that I meant to replace the thumbstick cap that our youngest ended up biting off yet another thumbstick here. For anyone that's ever got kids and switches in the same house, get something to cover the front of those switches. And specifically, I mean like really young kids. Because for some reason, the design of a lot of thumb caps, I assume, reminds them of a nipple or something, because they will just like start chomping on that thing. And yeah, for the most part, the things are large enough that it's, you know, safe and all that, but lost an untold number of thumbsticks to our daughter going up, biting them off of one switch or another that's nearby her, and then spitting them out, and then deciding, you know what, this is chewy, I think the dog would love this, and then trying to feed them to the dog. So there's that. Now, I was looking at Bordeaux thinking, like, yeah, there's no way that Nybbeth is actually doable with this thing. Like, this rule set basically explicitly forbids going into side quests, I think. You know what, we might as well try anyway. So, I switched Felicia over into an Enchantress, not for any practical or statistical reason, although she does have higher mind, I suppose, but just the fact that hopefully she would get hit less often than any other class, and we wouldn't have to hear her voice. So that's, you know, that's a thing. Also, what the hell did I just drop? What are you? You are a piece of a bin? What are you doing over here? Bizarre. Anyway. So we have a bit of a chat with a necromancer over here, and apparently we have him wrong. So he is on top of a big wall. We are on the bottom of this big wall. It is raining. We cannot walk. What is the plan? Picture, here's the, like, 1,000 steps in Tibet, or whatever it's called. Like, you just broke your ankle. What's your plan? So, okay. So we can't get up there. He will not come down as he is right now. And as it stands, he's going to send multiple waves of units at us. Now, this has been proven on several previous runs to not necessarily be much of an issue. You can run him out of units, and in the meantime, you can appreciate the pretty background art that's going on here. I gotta say, that's one of those things about Reborn that I just... it bugs me that it doesn't get as much attention as I feel it deserves, because I love whoever had that idea. like just like going and remaking the local area with the in-game tiles. It's so freaking legit. I just love to see that. It just makes me think that there's a bigger world out there, you know. So with Spell Strike, Felicia's odds of hitting are actually pretty good with most debuffs at this point. She's got pretty high mind for this point in the game. Spellcraft gives her that extra 30%, so she's typically looking at anywhere from like 50 to 70% odds, depending on what she's targeting. So that's pretty useful. And additionally, we're going to have a lot of units that are attempting to get close. Please remember at this point that staff-wise, the only upgraded staff that we have is actually going to be Felicia's, giving her that +1 range. I somehow spaced out and did not get one for our cleric, which I definitely should have. So that actually would have potentially screwed me over here. It was a case of my own incompetence actually being helpful. So the reason that it ended up helping out in the long run here is the fact that I didn't exercise multiple specific units. See, ultimately the answer here is not necessarily that we have to fight these fights ourselves, but the fact that we can use enemy units, well, against each other. Obviously, we cannot order a unit to move, but if, for example, we tell a unit that we are no longer their enemy and they decide to go move of their own volition, well, that seems to be entirely their choice. So, with that being said, that's the start of things. Now you might be saying, wait a minute, did you just spam recruit and cheat? No. No, we didn't do that. But we are going to knock out those human units for the time being, or the human zombie units, I should say. We're gonna just kind of knock them out for the time being until we can have a little bit of a chat later. Again, please bear in mind that we are not using World for this, so any and all recruits that are happening, if they fail, they fail. That's how we're going to be doing this and all that. So they end up taking out Kashua fairly early. I didn't have any healing that could reach her when she decided to go take her long move, unfortunately. I think technically Denim could have reached her on that next turn, but his turn never came up yet, so that was a bit of a bummer. And I also ended up switching out my fencers for spears at this point, so that we had access to a counterattack to build up additional MP. This is actually one of those little quiet benefits that helps out quite a bit for fencers in this game, just because spears are really a solid option for allowing a lot of potentially smaller attacks at one time. Because when you take a swing with a regular weapon, obviously it's going to do a bit more if you do more damage, but if you do multiple attacks, technically by counterattacking and hitting 2 units, that is counting as multiple attacks. And so for lower end spell spam, that is potentially very handy. So for the time being, I wasn't really sure how we were really going to pull this off, so what I decided to do was just let them approach, just kind of exercise them as they came up, and hope that Nybbeth eventually came down. And then I realized, well, I had recruit on their lists, I might as well. So ended up getting the recruit on Dietrich over there, which suddenly meant that we did not have nearly as much pressure on our units. See, they will still, for example, target Felicia, they will still target the cleric, but they won't necessarily target our other guys as much, so they can just focus on throwing that healing backwards, because the zombie in general will tend to be a bit weaker than the guys that we have, because they show up with one less piece of equipment. So this makes them a more tempting target for the higher DPS attacks that they do. I say DPS, it's, you know, just kind of damage in general, but it's also kind of misleading to say damage in general, because technically speaking, you got the whole penetration and overhead thing. So I guess kind of sort of DPS matters, because that's more of the soft damage that we're talking about. Screw it, whatever. Anyway, so, you know what I mean. So, anyways, what we're trying to do here is I was thinking I had a couple of units up there with my Fencer and Knight. Surely that Valkyrie will decide to go nearby my 2 recruiters, you know, if they're going and spamming that, which it didn't end up working out because they ended up getting separated on account of that tornado just now. So, instead, she ends up going downwards, and obviously, you can't really plan for this stuff, aside from, like, you can't really move units into position, but they kind of happen to line up in that particular place. I was hoping that's what they would do, but she ends up going down and attacking Felicia as well as the archer instead. So, okay, not great. She's completely out of position to try to recruit. Whatever, she's sticking nearby. If we need to exercise her, we can exercise her, but we don't have to take that road just yet. Anyway, so I continue firing away at all these other units, and unfortunately they are just out of range of exorcism in most situations. However, if the ghosts are killed off, they will have no MP for their first action, and also just to point this out, she survived with 3 health there. So they would have no MP for their first action, which means that as soon as a ghost comes back, they will attempt to melee with their staff, which gets them within close enough range to be able to take one tremendous shot to die and then immediately get exercised. So this ends up being very, very useful, especially due to the fact that where that ghost is right now is a tile with a upward thing on it. So basically this means that they're not going to be able to get knocked backwards. For some reason, the hover state that ghosts get seems different from the hover state that items give, to some extent, but we'll be testing more on that as we go on. A lot of this stuff is theoretical at this point. I could go and test it right now, but then it wouldn't be as fun learning this stuff on the fly, you know? Anyway, so we continue trying to heal and deal with the onslaught of attacks. He keeps spawning in more and more ranged units, and right now he's up to 3 archers, which is a problem, because we basically are 3 shots away from just more or less being stuck in the water without one of our kind of soft, squishy casters in the back there. As it stands, I finally started realizing that I have Charm on my Enchantress for a reason, so I decided to try using that to have them switch sides. And to some extent, it will matter quite a bit later, but it isn't mattering just quite yet. Additionally, later on I had the idea, which you might be thinking too, of like, well, technically you're not ordering somebody to take an attack if you charm your own units. You can't do that. So, that is a weird exception to the rule that we might make, courtesy of charm darts down the road, as just a, well, technically we weren't in control of them when they moved kind of thing, but we'll see if it's actually necessary. That's kind of the fail-safe option. If we manage to get all the way to kind of the middle of Chapter 2, and there's absolutely no way to progress on a map, technically speaking, you know, if you charm your own guy and they decide to attack and run forward, well, now they're in a new position and they attacked you. How do you count that? Anyway, so we'll see. We'll see. I'm hoping that will not at any point become necessary, but it is a last-ditch effort to keep the run going in that scenario. All right. So we have the Valkyrie that is still continuing to attack punishingly there. We have the archers that are like going and doing their whole thing. And at this point I was very, very glad that I brought along several stones to revive people, because it turned out I actually kind of needed every single one of them. So we end up getting more exorcisms, more ghosts getting killed, more tremendous shots going out constantly, punishing the hell out of these ghosts and skeletons and such. We're more or less able to take down probably about 3 or 4 of them per round. The archers are absolutely laying waste to them because they are especially weak to range damage on account of missing a piece of armor. Remember that range is ridiculously strong, it's just extremely subject to armor. Many undead units forget to wear pants. It's, you know, fair enough, I guess. They don't really have a whole lot down there to cover. So, anyway, continuing on. So yeah, we continue on with this for quite a decently long time, and you might notice that Nybbeth is still up there. We still have no means of getting up there. That better not be something. Is that something in my... Okay, that is not something in my coffee. Yeah, with summer starting, despite the fact that it's still freakishly cold at random outside, we've randomly had bugs showing up, and I was just paranoid I'm going to find that in my coffee. Anyway, moving on. By the way, did you know that 1995-2022 Square Enix limited all rights reserved? They have a period and a comma right next to each other. It's crazy, but it's not quite a semicolon. All right, so start looking at the odds of recruitment for that Valkyrie, and the odds are low. She's looking pretty loyal, unfortunately. Sometimes they're super loyal, sometimes they're very disloyal. In this case, she wound up being somewhat loyal, so bit of a bummer. But you know, I'm thinking at this point it's probably about time just to kind of exercise her and be done with it, because she is kind of providing a bulk of their damage at this point. But then I had another idea here, that if I shield bash my Enchantress backwards, then she is no longer tempted to go take that particular attack, and hopefully she'll go for Zombie plus Denim on her stab. That should be the most likely way to go, and if we're lucky at all, she'll end up picking some location nearby in order to try and not be completely out of position for her next attack there. So either way, we're trying to kind of mind game the computer here. It's going to be somewhat successful, but we'll see. So she ends up going for the stab, and it ends up being, once again, 2 tiles away from 2 of my recruiters, and her health is now exceptionally low. So I decide to throw out the recruit just for the hell of it, and against all frickin' odds, the 8% rolls. Now, she does end up succumbing to poison pretty much immediately, but are you potentially noticing the development that just happened by chance? Do you remember how I was mentioning earlier on in this video that there are specific lines that can be crossed in order to make the AI kind of behave differently? That once you reach certain thresholds on the map, once you reach particular areas, potentially you can make them chase you down because they think they're going to win and stuff like that, and or you can make them desperate. Because again, the AI does shift modes in Reborn, so you know, just something to consider. I'm actually curious to see how many of those mode shifts exist in the AI for the original PSP version as well, because hopefully we'll have some of that data at some point. But yeah, I'll have to go follow up with the modding community. I haven't had a whole lot of time for that kind of stuff lately, which is a bit of a bummer because I want to know what the hell's going on with that AI. Anyway, so you'll notice that, we now have a Valkyrie that is 1 tile ahead of most of the rest of the party. She is also, additionally, in a prime position to kind of exploit this mechanic that I was just talking about. So, for the time being, I kept attempting to use our casters in other ways, attempting to try to gain some sort of advantage, but they were a little bit stuck. They weren't really moving anywhere. Nybbeth wasn't getting any closer. He kept summoning in more reinforcements. And one way or another, we were kind of just more or less treading water, right? We'd made some progress, but it wasn't crazy progress. We were keeping our units alive and conserving resources, but still, we were no closer to our end goal than before. And additionally, those ghosts picking up cards is potentially a massive issue for us down the road. And I kept considering, you know what, there is technically an option here in which I shield bash Denim out of the way. I use the cleric to then push all over the archer here forward, and potentially exercise that guy that we already recruited in order to potentially have a longbow that's a little bit farther out. So this would give him 2 extra tiles of range. It could give us a bit more reach. It might get a different reaction from the AI. You may notice several times I end up mousing over the guy thinking about an exorcism for that particular reason. I'm like, oh, it's there. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. But I was very happy with this particular shot because we get exactly the double damage and then the knockback for the full kill there. Yes, it's only 10 extra damage, but it's surprising how often that matters. Anyway, so I still can't really, necessarily move just about anyone on the team, but this Valkyrie has options. This Valkyrie has a missile spell on her, as they tend to do, and additionally she has a card that allows her to do additional damage with it. That's pretty useful. Another thing that also will be very useful for these 2 units in particular, yes, I am kind of spoiling that this was eventually a success, but one thing that's potentially very useful is the fact that when it comes to heal spells, they do still technically count as damage, and depending on how they're used, it can cause a unit to be pushed back with a crit because it's counting as a damaging attack. Now, effectively, this does mean that we might be able to essentially use our clerics to spell push something in specific situations, while also not moving other units. Again, very oddly specific, but a benefit that will be considered over the course of this run. So, noticing the opportunity at this point, I moved Denim to make sure that Liza here did not get crit backwards at any point, because that would have vastly screwed up the now developing plan. So, I had a ranged attack, right? But, as it stands, I can't really do very much with that ranged attack. But I can push her forward in order to make a bit more progress. She gets knocked out. However, you might notice something interesting. A card has spawned right in front of her. The actual rules on whether something can move into that card are weird. Basically, if a unit is unconscious, they cannot be pushed into that card. So, like, my first thing was I'm just going to use Tremendous Shots to push her forward so that she's not losing health. She comes back to life. She comes back at, her at least maximum-ish at half health. and she's able to continue fighting. Because right now, even if she gets up, she actually does not have the means to continue fighting. Because she'll usually have enough damage from that attack to just immediately get taken out, and more often than not, she's actually getting whittled down and put back into the ground before she has a means to even throw out a fireball. Now, there's two things that are notable about that particular card, and this would have been doable without it before somebody says it, but specifically, it is an MP card, which means that on turn 1, she would be able to potentially throw out a fireball if somebody has attacked her. So that is already one potential benefit. Bear in mind, again, that MP is being recharged every time that a unit is fighting, which means that they are able to get, you know, those particular oddly specific benefits of being able to immediately turn around and cast something. So we'll put that in the hold on, we'll get back to it box. And then at some point here, I'm going to get to that archer. But for the time being, I was starting to have a bit better luck with those charms, and then we were sending the skeletons forward. This doesn't really help that much in the now term, because even if they knock them out, they're just going to immediately come back to life. And realistically, this doesn't really do much more than potentially give them more cards to pick up, because as soon as they get out of range, we can't really recharm them. Bear in mind, again, we don't have high-range stabs as of yet, we don't have extend, so our debuff range is extraordinarily limited. Basically, if we can get to Chapter 3 or 4, the entirety of the game is entirely our oyster at that point, and it will be possible even on the more complex maps. But for the time being, our options are again somewhat limited. And again, I stare at that exorcism thinking, you know, I just saw Nybbeth move forward. He's right there. He finally decided to move forward. Now, there's two reasons why he moved forward, and one of them is the fact that he's running low on reinforcements. So there's two things that'll make an AI move out of position, and one of them is if you've passed that particular threshold that makes them aggressive. So typically this is around the middle of the map. And for another, it's if they... Well, actually, I guess three things, because for one of them, it seems to be if they're pre-scripted to attack at a certain point. Like, for example, if you hold back and wait for Oz around turn 3 or 4, depending on the situation, he will just charge ahead of everybody because he's an impatient bastard like that. There's a lot of personalization to the way that they act. Anyway, so yeah. In this particular case, he is now out of reinforcements. He has summoned all that he can, which means he is no longer going out of his way to hide on top of his tower. On top of that, well, I tried throwing rocks, I tried tremendous shots, the zombie was not moving. She couldn't be pushed into that card while she was unconscious. We'll get around to more of that later. But anyways, this meant that now charmed units and Nybbeth were nearby each other, but that also was not how we ended up winning this thing. See, now that he's decided to be a bit more aggressive, this also means that we can bait him into that third opportunity, which is if they see a good attack number that they can get on someone. And so in this particular case, that's where the Valkyrie comes into play, because if we push her a little bit forward, she is now very easily within range for one of his spells there, which then causes him to be a bit more aggressive, which means that now suddenly he sees big numbers coming from the rest of the team as well, which means that he's basically going to stick around and actually get close enough for us to attack him with our longbows. If we hadn't upgraded to longbows, we simply would not have the range to make this happen. If I'd remembered that I had the extra mage staff to go give to the cleric, I probably would have exercised some of the skeletons that ended up helping to kind of develop this particular situation. So it was sort of a happy accident in that particular regard. But anyways, at least on the plus side here, even though she does have more limited range, she is moving a little bit faster, which also probably helped out in its own way. You might also notice I've got several longbows as well as still one shortbow, just to have that option on hand. And by the way, I counted the tiles. That particular shot should have pushed her forward to where that tile is. Unfortunately, it is not going to be working that particular way, so, you know. Anyway, so yeah, she can't be pushed into it because she cannot collect a card in her current state. That doesn't mean that they can't be moved in a situation where they can't get the card, they just can't start their turn that way. Or they can't start the interaction that particular way. That it'll make sense in a moment, alright? I know it sounds like I'm explaining a whole lot for nothing. It'll make sense in a moment. anyways, we now have an archer and an axe guy that are going and battering units around. And the nice thing about having a berserker in particular, I think that's a berserker, but either way, a shield and axe guy in particular, is that they have a tendency to use their peltas to knock stuff around, because the peltas will do more damage versus specific units, which means that oftentimes they will knock them into exorcism range, which we'll see in just a moment. So anyways, we keep healing, we keep holding, and keep attempting to develop this. Right now I'm waiting for the Valkyrie to come back on her feet so that we can see if knocking her into the card using just a normal tremendous shot will work. I remember it working, but at this point, this is kind of that mental stage where you start questioning your knowledge of anything. So anyways, start pecking away at different units. I want those casters gone as soon as possible, because again, the casters, as soon as they're down, if they are within melee range, they will attempt to use their staff, which means that they can quickly be exercised. This makes them very kind of predictable in terms of the stuff that they'll do. And additionally, now that Nybbeth is within range, courtesy of that Valkyrie, he is going to consistently keep attacking the entire rest of the party here. Alright. Sorry. Throat's doing funny throat things, as it tends to do. Alright, so little by little, we're making incremental progress. They're starting to push forward, but, you know, this is usually when stuff has a tendency to go very suddenly wrong. And it does very suddenly start going wrong in a moment, but for the time being, we're safe-ish. Courtesy of the fact that these guys have been around for a while, they picked up some solid upgrades. We've now got a situation where yeah, they're going to have a pretty decent bit of beef behind their shots. Okay. So, continue firing on all these units here. If there's a kill that the AI can potentially take, this also could create a situation where they'll go attack that guy in particular. Once the AI has more AoEs, being able to mind control their splash casters will also be a bit more useful. And obviously a lot of our later game enemies will have healing, so for the time being, we will not be able to rely on the simple, like, let them get close and chip strategy, but we will have more options down the road. For the time being, given our limited range, it's frankly a wonder we were able to get this far at all. So, continue firing as we do, and unfortunately the Valkyrie ends up getting taken out yet again before we end up getting them up to that card. This will continue being an ongoing frustration because everybody is just very slightly out of range of Nybbeth. He hasn't gotten that close yet. He's still sniping away. I can't move anyone, so we can't exactly lure, so all we're doing is kind of sitting, turtling, and waiting for somebody to get close. So we fire, and we fire, and we fire, and we fire, and just pray. Pray that one of them will decide to get close here. At a certain point, I start thinking, like, maybe there's a few other movement options that might be available to us. Maybe moving Denim off to the side, maybe throwing that one archer there backwards. It wouldn't really do anything good for us, though. So, either way. I probably could have shield bashed the soldier off to the right there, which would have allowed for develop. Actually, no, there's that one tile higher. That's why I wasn't doing it. I was like, I wonder why I didn't do that. Obvious reasons, that's why. Okay. So yeah, lots of maintaining as Nybbeth gets closer and closer. He's inching little by little. He's slowly realizing that all his units are getting taken out, and as his units get taken out, he becomes more aggressive. When they're down on the ground, they seem to still be considered kind of active units, but as soon as they're exercised, that's when they're obviously not on the field anymore, so he seems to get more threatened. Again, I don't know if they have a dedicated threat score or something, but that's kind of how it seems to work. And again, I was thinking to exercise this guy, because it's like, man, I could shield bash this archer up here, I could just get him one tile forward, he can reach Nybbeth at that point, surely. Like, come on, he's right there! The more I thought about it, the more it was like, this guy, if we can save the zombie, he's going to be way more useful in the long run. Anyway. So we got our tremendous shot going, and I should probably also mention, if a unit dies or whatever else, I'm not resetting to save units. If a fight is winnable, it is winnable. It either is or it isn't. So anyways, we get the Valk up on her feet, she gets knocked forward, and as you can see, she still was able to move onto the tile with the buff card, but due to the fact that she was standing, she was allowed to actually move onto that tile this time. She'll collect it as soon as she gets up. So, either way, she's down, and once again we are sitting and waiting, but Nybbeth now sees that we have passed that area by the rock. That area by the rock seems to be the line for this map where the AI starts to get aggressive. Like in all versions of this one, whether it's Nybbeth, whether it's the neutral trio, or whether it's the pirate fight with the chickens, it seems to be that's when the AI starts to really swarm. So at that point, he seems to get even more aggressive and finally decides to go in for those big numbers. Additionally, part of that was also the fact that he probably saw a kill on that archer, and he just simply had to take it. The guy is fascinated with death, after all, so why wouldn't he? So he sees the meditate, he goes for the missile, and goes for the whop. Now, he didn't get the kill, but he was seeing some big numbers rolling in his head, right? So little by little, we start moving forward. He gets the charm, and we continue moving forward. He gets the... we have the archer getting close. Unfortunately, it's not close enough to charm. It would be real good if it was. Tried going for an attack on the skeleton, but it didn't really do very much. But again, Nybbeth is now seemingly within longbow range. So we're going to go take the shot. And sure enough, finally, he can be touched. And he gets shot in the naughty place. And from there, it all seemed to finally be falling into place. The question was, would he then run away from this particular situation? Because many AIs, especially I'm thinking the Almorica wizards and such, will run away upon first contact. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to handle that outside of recruiting units at a higher elevation. That is the current plan. But either way, he gets hyper-aggressive because he sees the kill versus that archer. He ends up low-rolling it, and he doesn't get the kill. Anyway, so at this point, he is easily within range of everybody to go just completely mob-pile the guy. You love to see it. It's just good stuff. Our archer does end up getting taken out, though, but thankfully we have additional items for bringing people back. At least so I'm thinking at the time. So we're just going to go charm some units. We're going to go throw, throw their own guys back at them. We're getting pretty lucky with these charms. Everything's looking pretty great. Our crits with our short bow do a whopping no damage. But again, he does end up essentially quintupling his damage, courtesy of that skeleton behind him. Again, with the short bow, the thing is basically like a bird hunting bow. What the hell do you expect? Anyway. Longbows can still do a pretty decent knock against him at this point. It's still okay damage. It's about the same as, if not more than what many of our melee guys are capable of. But still. There's the option here to go get people back with Blessing Stones. Allows for some instant actions. And it's actually because of those instant actions that we end up actually winning it later, because it got very close to actually still tipping in the other direction, because now they've got everybody on us at the same time, and if they end up getting the full domino effect on the full party, then we have a problem. Because if he decides to get too close, we literally can do nothing about it. So it goes for the Meteor Strike, takes out our Valkyrie over there. And for some reason, he just really likes that little dip in tiles down there. Bear in mind, he is a caster, so he doesn't have 2 jump. He can only jump up 1 tile, so he only has 1 way up, and he seems to really not like that way up. So he kind of just sort of sits there at this point. Again, I'm assuming this was just meant to be his final sitting place, as it were. But the Felicia here ended up looking a bit worse for wear. That's actually why I have her basic missile spell replaced with a leech health here. Yeah, the basic missile spell would do more, but the utility of having her get back up on her feet is worth a lot more to me here. Additionally, there's that situation where getting a unit shield bashed into exorcism range finally happened. Very useful whenever there's shield upgrades that end up happening, like that Pelta there. Which basically just gave him the question of, like, I've got 2 things with basically the same damage, I'm just going to go for the one that's faster. Any darn ways. So we have our longbows, as you'd kind of expect here. Continuously taking shots on Nybbeth. It's not a crazy amount of damage, but again, it is still damage. It's at least damage that we can land as it stands. And if you have completely min-maxed archers by this point, you can absolutely steamroll him with longbows. Like, if you come here right before the end of the chapter, you can absolutely dunk on this guy. So there's that. Okay. So, we get our dead shots and all of that. We get our continual longbow shootage, because I was really expecting that he would try to run away here. I really thought he would just suddenly decide to just peace out and be done with it, but just no, he just didn't feel like it. Wasn't having it. This wasn't what he was about today, so... Alright. Okie dokie, and hopefully I didn't just break my mic. We'll see how this sounds later. Anywho, some exorcism ends up doing the happening, and they end up taking out some of their own ghosts. Eventually, hopefully, those ghosts will decide to do something a bit more useful for us, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. We got the dude, he is close, he is not going anywhere. Stuff is generally looking pretty darn positive at this point. But as far as the question of the kind of usefulness of this tech going forward, a lot of the situations that were previously discussed in terms of being possible, impossible, all that kind of thing, a lot of them could potentially be bypassed with use of the recruit skill. For example, if a unit were to approach nearby the top of a building and we happen to have somebody sitting on the bottom of it in some awkward location, we now potentially have a unit that is sitting up top with the ability to be recruited there. Once we end up getting resurrection and stuff like that, this means that we could effectively treat every unit like a zombie, allowing them to be recruited, knocked out again, essentially resurrected once again, and kind of continuing on from there. There aren't really any skills that are going to be moving our own guys in very particular, like, teleporty locations outside of the post-game. In fact, funnily enough, in order to complete the post-game, we have to participate in the post-game, and one of the ways that that ends up even remotely being possible is basically due to teleportation draconics way the hell down the line. Again, assuming we can get that far. My current plan, as it stands, is that whatever way we decide to proceed forward with the game, again, I'm assuming law is going to be the easiest way to do this, is just going to be kind of chain recruiting our way up to particular locations. If we end up recruiting, for example, as I mentioned before, a unit on top of a house in Bulma Musa 3, then potentially that could allow for them to attack units nearby them. I'm not entirely sure how this allows us to reach the units on the cliff, but again, we'll see how that goes. Thankfully, in some cases they do have a little bit more mobility, but it's specifically those cliff units that would render us stuck there. If we do end up proceeding forward with chaos, then the way we'd probably end up having to handle the situation in over in Rhyme would actually be to use beast tamers essentially just shoved into the river, attempting to recruit the dragons, which would then attempt to kind of awkwardly kind of dragon breath their way around corners, and potentially that might be the better way to go. The more I think about it, the more it seems like the more realistic approach is probably going to be chaos or neutral, but I'm not 100% certain. Part of the reason that this ends up kind of complicating things is the fact that if we end up going down chaos, we have the... I mean, Zapan and his every interaction end up being a bit of an issue. We have the Rainbow Aqueduct, which would end up being a problem, where potentially we would have to use only rune fencers to essentially slide around the water. We'd be pelted with octopi the entire way over there, which sounds like one hell of a fun fight, actually. Then we, for example, have the issue of the volcano. We'll eventually have to reach a volcano. Eventually, we only have to deal with a few units there, but we wouldn't be able to actually jump over the gaps in that particular location, even with flying units. If you launch them forward, they would just end up getting launched back, which would mean that maybe we might have to try to figure out... I don't think there's any possible way to get a Necromancer by that point, but... something. We'd have to figure out something. Probably just using charmed units and hoping that they kind of do the best they can. As I recall, most of the stuff there shouldn't have any healing, so if we end up, for example, charming the skeleton on the very tippy top of the volcano, that archer could maybe get the job done. So yeah, we'll play that by ear. Yeah, with that, Nybbeth is done, and we are now 2 zombies richer. Those zombies are going to become extremely important, maybe, probably, and or they will become completely irrelevant. I don't know, but we'll find that out as time goes on. It's funny. I wasn't sure about Nybbeth's voice acting the very first time I played Reborn. It has grown on me so much that the dude's legit one of my favorite characters at this point. Anyway, he turns into a sweet crow and flies away, which gives us stuff. I forgot to mention this earlier, but stuff was about to kind of spiral towards the end there. With several units that were kind of on death's door. More than likely, we managed to avoid a situation, courtesy of that one blessing stone being used in order to give the archer an instant turn, in order to then go ahead and kind of bring everything back, as it were. Again, it might have been everything, it might have been nothing, it's hard to say, but I could think of no more fitting name for these two new soldiers, because we have a new male soldier slash fighter type situation, and we have a new lady with a spear, so say hello to Lex and Chloe. Because, they also will miraculously, die in every encounter, but still surprisingly seem to keep coming back for some reason. So, it seems to make sense to me that unless the entire party's wiped, they do not die. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at this point. I ended up going and switching Ravenous out for a more ranged setup here. And additionally, I have talked a bit too loud, so the chickens are a bit too pissed about things in the background right now. I apologize for that. They like to chirp. It is what they do. So yeah, that's kind of how that goes. Eventually, by the way, if you're wondering why I kept putting concentration on my fencers, eventually that will be useful. It's not useful anytime right now, but down the road, it will be. So, anyways, that's kind of about that. Here, let's go ahead and put it back a couple videos just to finish talking here. So, thank y'all for stopping by. Again, this is going to be a bit of a long run, but this is exactly the kind of long run that I love to do. So, you all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.